Today, we're going to dive into a dark and mysterious atmosphere with 7 horror stories involving rainy days. Get ready to hear chilling stories about sinister events that happen when the sky darkens and the rain doesn't stop falling. So, sit back, listen to the sound of the rain outside, and let this spine-chilling journey begin. Oh, and before lightning strikes your connection, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave your like. This really helps the channel and ensures you don't miss out on any terrifying content like this. Let's go. 1. The flooded road. Sarah, a 34-year-old nurse, was returning home after a night shift at Harrogate District Hospital. The storm hitting northern England that night was exceptionally severe, with weather warnings recommending avoiding non-essential travel. "I should have stayed in the hospital," Sarah admitted later, "but after a 12-hour shift, all I wanted was my own bed." Sarah's usual route was blocked by a fallen tree, forcing her to take a detour along minor roads that snaked through the Yorkshire moors. The rain fell in thick sheets, reducing visibility to a few meters, and the headlights of his Volkswagen Golf barely penetrated the darkness. At around 11:40 p.m., Sarah arrived at a section of the road where water was already covering the asphalt. Hesitant but determined to get home, she proceeded slowly. 100 meters ahead, the water rose dramatically, reaching halfway up the wheels. The car's engine choked and died. "At that moment, I realized I had made a terrible mistake," she reported. "The car wouldn't start, the water kept rising, and I was completely alone." Sarah tried calling emergency services, but reception was intermittent. He was only able to report his approximate situation before the call dropped. It was estimated that rescuers would take at least 45 minutes to arrive due to the multiple emergencies caused by the storm. At 0017, headlights appeared on the road behind her. An old pickup truck stopped a few meters away. A man got out, wearing a yellow raincoat and carrying a powerful flashlight. "Stuck in the flood, huh?" he called, approaching. "I'm Nathan. I live right there. It happens all the time on these roads." The man appeared to be in his 50s, with a grey beard and a strong Yorkshire accent. His presence initially brought Sarah relief. "You're not going to get this car out of here tonight," he said, surveying the situation. "But I can take you to my house to wait for rescue. I have a radio that works even in this weather." Something about the way Nathan peered into the car through the windows made Sarah uncomfortable. She noted that despite claiming to live right there, he did not specify exactly where, and his truck had no visible license plates. "I appreciate the offer, but I've already called rescue," Sarah replied. "I'd rather wait here." Nathan insisted, gradually becoming more assertive. "Don't be silly, lady. The water will keep rising. This area gets completely flooded in storms like this. I've seen cars get swept away." As they talked, Sarah noticed something disturbing. Nathan's flashlight occasionally illuminated the road ahead, revealing that the water was significantly deeper than it appeared in the darkness. Even more disturbing, there were what appeared to be other partially submerged vehicles about 50 meters away. "If it's so dangerous, why are you driving around here?" she asked, keeping the doors locked. "I'm checking to see if there are people trapped, like you," he replied, his tone changing subtly. "I do this in every big storm." Sarah then remembered news she had seen weeks earlier, reports of robberies of vulnerable motorists on rural roads in Yorkshire during adverse weather conditions. Victims described an older man who would show up offering help, only to rob them or worse. When Nathan started testing the door handles, Sarah turned on the car alarm. The man backed away, visibly irritated. "I'm trying to help," he insisted, "but if you'd rather risk your life—" At that moment, Sarah's phone briefly regained signal. She deliberately mentioned out loud that she was updating her location to the police, who would be arriving soon. The change in Nathan's behavior was immediate. He looked nervously at the road and mumbled something about looking for others who need help. He quickly returned to his truck and drove off, not in the direction he had come from, but continuing along the flooded road with surprising ease, as if he knew exactly which parts were safe to cross. 40 minutes later, an official rescue team arrived with a flood-friendly vehicle. Upon being informed about the strange encounter, the team leader exchanged worried looks with his colleagues. "There are no residences for miles in this direction," he reported, "and we've had several similar reports over the last 2 years." The subsequent investigation revealed something disturbing. Using drones, police located 3 submerged vehicles in a particularly deep area of the road, about 100 meters from where Sarah had stopped. One of them contained the body of a woman who had gone missing 3 months earlier during another severe storm. Even more alarming, in an abandoned barn just off the road, investigators found a collection of belongings apparently stolen from drivers: wallets, electronics, jewelry, along with detailed maps of the region's most flood-prone areas. "He was not guiding people out of danger," concluded Detective Inspector Robert Harrison. "I was deliberately directing them to areas where they would be completely vulnerable." Nathan was never identified or captured. Police suspect it moves between different counties, only appearing during extreme weather conditions when emergency responses are overwhelmed. 2. The temporary shelter. The case of Michael and Emma Donovan has been documented by Police Scotland as one of the most disturbing incidents in the remote Highlands. The events of that rainy night were reconstructed from police records and statements. The American couple was celebrating their 5th anniversary with a trip to Scotland. On the afternoon of September 17th, while driving along a country road near Glencoe, they were caught in a violent storm. Torrential rain reduced visibility to almost zero, and strong winds threatened to push his vehicle off the road. As the storm worsened, they saw a stone house next to the road. A dim light shone from one of the windows, suggesting that there might be someone there to help them. Leaving the car parked, they ran through the rain to the house. The structure was old, with a partially damaged roof. The front door was ajar. Michael knocked several times, but there was no response. After hesitating, the couple entered, calling to see if anyone was there. The interior was dusty and dimly lit, but surprisingly intact for a seemingly abandoned house. A fireplace contained still warm ashes, and a kettle rested on a stove. In the main room, a single lamp provided the lighting they had seen from the road. As they explored, they noticed disturbing details. There was food in the pantry, some recently opened cans. A local newspaper dated it just 3 days ago. Stranger still, they found several suitcases and backpacks stacked in a closet, all appearing to belong to different people. As night fell and the storm intensified, the couple decided to remain. That's when they noticed the photographs. Hanging in a hallway partially hidden were dozens of framed photographs. While examining them, Michael made a disturbing discovery. Each photo showed different people, all appearing disoriented or asleep. Some were in the same room where they now found themselves. "We need to get out of here," he whispered to Emma. At that moment, they heard footsteps coming down a staircase. An elderly man appeared, wearing worn-out clothes and carrying a tray of tea. "Ah, you're awake," he said, in a thick Scottish accent, as if his presence had been expected. "The storm won't pass anytime soon. You should drink this to keep warm." The man, who introduced himself as Alistair, seemed friendly, but something in his eyes made the couple uncomfortable. He spoke as if they were expected guests, not intruders seeking shelter. As they talked, Emma noticed something alarming. The teacup had a strange residue at the bottom. Pretending to drink it, she secretly poured the contents onto a plant when he turned around. "You're the third couple this year," Alistair commented casually. "People always find my house during storms. Curious, isn't it?" When Alistair briefly left, Michael whispered, "The suitcases in the closet. I think they belong to people who never left here." The couple decided to escape immediately. As they headed for the door, Alistair returned, blocking their exit. "Nobody ever wants to stay," he said, his tone changing drastically. "Even after all the work I've done to lure them here." It was then that they realized the light they had seen was not accidental. It was a bait to attract travelers lost during storms. What followed was a desperate struggle. Michael managed to knock Alistair down, allowing them to escape. They ran back to their car, pursued by the man shouting threats in the darkness. Managing to reach the main road, they encountered a police patrol. When they returned with reinforcements the next morning, the house was empty. A search revealed the true extent of the horror: a hidden basement containing evidence of multiple victims spanning decades. A diary detailed how Alistair McGregor had turned storms into opportunities to lure vulnerable travelers. He studied weather patterns, explained Detective Inspector Ian Murray, knew exactly when to position his welcome light to attract people desperate for shelter. Alistair McGregor was never found despite an extensive search. He is believed to have escaped through smugglers' tunnels that were discovered connecting the house to a remote exit in the hills. The case prompted an official warning for tourists in the Highlands. During severe storms, stay in your vehicles and avoid seeking shelter in isolated, unverified properties. And on rainy nights in Glencoe, residents still report occasionally spotting a lone light in the distant hills, a light that seems to beckon lost travelers to safety, only to lead them to something far more sinister than the storm outside. 3. The basement flood. Thomas and Anna Visser had moved with their 2 children, Lena, 9, and Max, 6, into a 3-story house in the historic Jordan neighborhood just 4 months earlier. The property, built in the 17th century, had the characteristic charm of old canal houses, including a basement that was just below water level. The real estate agent warned us that the basement might have moisture problems during heavy rains, Thomas later reported, but we never imagined it would lead us to discover that. On November 12th, an exceptionally severe storm hit Amsterdam. The rain had been falling incessantly for more than 48 hours, and the city's canals were running dangerously high. At around 10 p.m., as the family was getting ready for bed, Anna noticed water running under the door, leading to the basement. "We need to check," she insisted. "If we don't control it now, the damage will be much worse in the morning." Thomas reluctantly agreed. The basement was rarely used by the family, mainly for storing seasonal items and some boxes that had not yet been unpacked from moving. The wooden stairs creaked under their feet as they descended, lighting the way with flashlights, as the electrical wiring in the basement was old and unreliable. The water was already about 10 centimeters high when they reached the bottom of the stairs. While Thomas examined the source of the leak, Anna shone her flashlight into the corners of the damp, moldy space. It was then that he noticed something strange. One of the stone walls seemed to have been recently modified. Some stones had been removed and then replaced, creating a small niche that did not appear in the original plans of the house. "Thomas," she called, her voice shaking. "I think someone messed with this wall." Approaching, Thomas examined the makeshift alcove. Using a screwdriver from his toolkit, he managed to loosen one of the stones, revealing a hidden space behind it. What they found inside chilled their blood. A backpack containing a flashlight, non-perishable food, a bottle of water, and most disturbingly, a thick envelope filled with newspaper clippings and photographs. "They were photos of us," described Anna, still visibly shaken during her testimony. "Photos taken through the windows of our house, from angles that would only be possible if someone was watching us closely. There were photos of us eating dinner, the children playing in the garden, even Thomas and I sleeping." The newspaper clippings were equally disturbing. The announcement of the Visser's purchase of the house, articles about Thomas, who was a relatively well-known college professor, and even the local school newsletter that mentioned Lena winning a science contest. As they processed the horror of this discovery, they heard a sound that made their hearts stop. Wet footsteps descending the basement stairs. "I thought it was the kids," Thomas whispered. "But then I remembered that Anna had asked them to stay in the room." Thomas quickly turned off his flashlight and pulled Anna behind a stack of boxes. Through the dim light, they saw a male figure descend the last few steps and enter the shallow water. The man seemed to know the space well, moving directly to the niche in the wall, apparently without noticing the stone already removed or the presence of the couple. When the intruder realized that his hiding place had been discovered, he turned sharply. For a moment, the light of his flashlight illuminated his face, a man of approximately 40, with stubble and eyes wide with surprise. He seemed so normal, Thomas recalled, like someone you'd pass on the street without noticing. What followed was a tense confrontation. Thomas, driven by the instinct to protect his family, grabbed a nearby tool and demanded to know who the intruder was. The man, clearly not expecting to be discovered, tried to escape up the stairs. In the ensuing fight, Thomas managed to hold him off, long enough for Anna to escape and call the police. The subsequent investigation revealed a terrifying truth. The man, identified as Peter Clausen, had been the house's previous tenant. When the property was sold after the death of his aunt, the previous owner, he apparently never fully left. He had created a secret access through an abandoned service entrance that connected the basement to one of the canals, explained Inspector Willem Bakker. For months, he would come and go undetected, using the basement as a base from which to observe his family. Even more disturbing, police found evidence that Clausen occasionally went upstairs when the family was out or sleeping. Small items that the Vissers had reported lost were found in their apartment across town. Anna's hairbrush, drawings made by Max, even Thomas's favorite coffee cup. He was living a sort of parallel life with our family, concluded Anna, as if he somehow still considered the house his and us as, I don't know, characters in his twisted fantasy. Peter Clausen was convicted of home invasion, stalking, and several other crimes. The Visser family sold the house a few months later, unable to continue living there after the violation of their privacy and security. The case sparked a wave of checks on older houses in Amsterdam, particularly those with basements connected to canals. Several other secret entrances have been discovered, relics of a time when smugglers used the canals to illegally transport goods. What's up, guys? Rainy day horror stories are chilling even now, aren't they? If you're enjoying these scary stories, how about taking a quick stop and subscribing to the channel? Just click the sign up button below and take the opportunity to leave your like too. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to continue bringing you more terrifying content like this. It's quick and makes all the difference. Now, shall we go back to our rainy day horror stories? There's still a lot of storm of fear ahead. 4. The Rain Neighbor. Claire, a 32-year-old meteorologist, had moved into a townhouse in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood 6 months earlier. The city, known for its constant rain, was the perfect environment for someone with his profession and passion for the weather. "I've always been observant by nature," Claire later explained. "It's part of my job to notice patterns, anomalies, things that don't fit together." It was this attention to detail that made her notice something strange about her right-hand neighbor, Raymond Wells. A bald, middle-aged man of ordinary appearance, Wells was rarely seen by the other residents of the street. Claire, however, noticed a peculiar pattern. "He only left the house during storms," she recorded in her diary on January 14th. "Not just light rain, but during the worst storms when most people would stay home." Initially, Claire chalked it up to harmless eccentricity. Maybe he just liked the rain, or had some kind of job related to weather emergencies. But as the winter progressed and the storms intensified, she began to notice more disturbing details. On days of heavy rain, Wells would go out late at night, always carrying a large backpack and returning hours later, often soaked and seemingly lighter. Stranger still, he seemed to time his departures to coincide with the most intense moments of the storms. "Today, the forecast called for the worst storm of the year," Claire wrote on February 3rd. At 11:15 p.m., just as the winds reached their peak, Wells left. He returned at 2:40 as the storm began to subside. Claire's professional curiosity led her to create a detailed log, correlating Wells's outings with precise meteorological data. The pattern was undeniable. He only came out when the noise of the rain and wind was at its highest. On February 17th, Claire was working from home during a particularly violent storm when she heard a strange sound coming from the Wells house, something between a thump and a scuffling. Worried it might be an emergency, she debated whether to check or respect her neighbor's privacy. His decision was made when he saw Wells hurriedly leaving, backpack on his back, nervously looking around before getting into his car. Something about his behavior seemed off, almost frantic, different from his previous methodical outings. Driven by a mixture of concern and curiosity, Claire walked across the garden to Wells's house. The back door was unlocked, another departure from his normally cautious demeanor. Inside, the house was impeccably organized, almost sterile in its cleanliness. In the basement, however, Claire made a disturbing discovery. One area had recently been cleaned with harsh chemicals, but traces of something that looked like blood were still visible in the cracks in the floor. In a locked cabinet, which she managed to open with a spare key found nearby, were tools, ropes, and most alarmingly, identity documents belonging to people Claire did not recognize. "My stomach sank," she reported. "I realized I was in the house of someone who was potentially very dangerous." Claire quickly left and called the police. When investigators arrived, she shared her observations about Wells' pattern of behavior and what she had found. The subsequent investigation revealed a horrifying truth. Raymond Wells was connected to at least 7 disappearances in the Seattle area over the past 2 years. All the victims had disappeared during nights of severe storms. "He used the noise of the rain and wind to mask any sound," explained Detective Marcus Rodriguez. "The storm provided perfect cover, reduced visibility, empty streets, and constant noise that would drown out screams or fights." More disturbingly, forensic analysis of the basement revealed that Wells had developed a meticulous system for cleaning evidence. The heavy rain also helped in this regard, washing away any traces that might have been left on his car or clothes. Wells was arrested 3 days later, trying to cross the border into Canada. In his car, police found the backpack containing personal items from his most recent victim and detailed notes about predicted future storms. During interrogations, Wells remained mostly silent, but made one statement that sent chills through investigators. "Rain is the only witness who never speaks." Claire Thompson received recognition from the police department for her keen observation and courage. His training as a meteorologist had been instrumental in establishing the pattern that connected Wells to the crimes. "I never imagined that my knowledge of weather patterns would lead me to discover something so dark," she reflected. "Now, whenever I hear heavy rain, I think about how many secrets it could be drowning out." The Rain Neighbor case has led to an increase in community vigilance in Seattle, particularly during storms. And for the residents of the peaceful street in Ballard, rain never sounded the same again, each drop carrying the echo of a disturbing truth. Sometimes, monsters don't hide in the shadows, but behind the curtain of rain, waiting for the perfect moment to come out. 5. The Last Ride. David, a 38-year-old university lecturer, was driving home from a late conference at the University of Edinburgh. The storm that hit the city that night was exceptionally severe, with strong winds and torrential rain reducing visibility to a few meters. At around 10:30 p.m., whilst driving along the A720, David spotted a lone figure walking along the side of the road, completely soaked. His first instinct was to keep driving, but the intensity of the storm made him reconsider. "Nobody was supposed to be out there at that time," he explained. "It could be an emergency." David stopped his Volvo a few meters ahead and waited for the figure to approach. He was a man of approximately 30 years old, medium height, dark hair stuck to his face by the rain. He was wearing a light jacket, completely inappropriate for the storm, and carrying an apparently heavy backpack. "Do you need help?" David asked, partially rolling down the window. "My car broke down a few miles ago," the man replied, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "I'm trying to get to Dalkeith. Would it be too much to ask for a lift?" Dalkeith stood in David's path, and the idea of leaving someone in that condition seemed cruel. He unlocked the doors, and the stranger quickly entered, placing his sodden backpack on the floor between his feet. "Thank you," said the man, running his hands through his wet hair. "You are a savior. My name is Ian." As they resumed their journey, David tried to maintain a casual conversation. Ian responded in short sentences, often looking out the window into the rainy darkness. There was something about his behavior that made David slightly uncomfortable. That's when David noticed something disturbing. The rainwater that ran from Ian's clothes onto the car seat had a slightly reddish color. Initially, he thought it might be mud or road grime, but the color and consistency seemed different. At the same time, he remembered the news he had seen that morning. The police were looking for a man known as the Storm Killer, responsible for 3 homicides in the last 2 months. All of the victims had been attacked during severe storms. The description was vague, but mentioned a man of medium height, dark hair, probably in his 30s. David felt his heart speed up. He tried to remain calm as his mind processed the disturbing coincidences. "You said your car broke down. What model is it?" David asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Ian hesitated for a moment too long. "A Ford. blue. "Oh, I have a mechanic friend who specializes in Fords," David replied quickly. "I can call him if you want." "It's not necessary," Ian replied, his tone hardening slightly. "I already called someone." The silence that followed was suffocating. David noticed that the backpack at Ian's feet appeared to be leaking something dark onto the car's carpet. When he stopped at a traffic light, he took the opportunity to discreetly send a text message to his wife. "I got a ride. Suspicious man. If he doesn't arrive in 30 minutes, call the police." But his phone had no signal due to the storm. "Trouble?" Ian asked, observing David's frustration with the phone. "Just checking to see if my wife is okay," David lied. "She gets worried about these storms." "Wives tend to worry," Ian commented, an odd smile forming on his face. "The last person who gave me a ride was also worried about his wife." The comment hung in the air like a veiled threat. David realized he needed to act. They were approaching a brightly lit gas station. "I need gas," he said, signaling suddenly, almost out of fuel. Ian looked at the dashboard, where the indicator clearly showed the tank was half full. "Are you sure? It looks like there's still plenty left." "This meter is broken," David insisted, already slowing down. "Don't worry, it will be quick." As he entered the station, David noticed a police cruiser parked next to the convenience store. He stopped next to the car and turned off the engine. "I'll pay you in advance," he said, quickly getting out of the car before Ian could protest. Instead of going to the cashier, David walked directly up to the officers, quickly explaining his suspicions. The officers acted immediately, approaching the vehicle with caution. What followed confirmed David's worst fears. When approached, Ian tried to flee, abandoning his backpack in the car. When police detained him, they found a bloody knife in his pocket. The backpack contained blood-stained clothing and personal belongings that were later identified as belonging to a victim attacked that same night. Ian Campbell was actually Thomas Reeves, the man police were looking for in the 3 previous homicides. His tactic was simple. He attacked during storms, when the victims were most vulnerable, and the noise of the rain masked any sound. Then he looked for hitchhikers to leave the crime scene. David Mitchell was honored by Police Scotland for his insight and courage. His decision to stop at the specific gas station where there were police officers was described as extraordinary intuition or divine luck. "I don't consider myself a hero," David declared in a later interview, "just someone who paid attention to the warning signs. But I still think about what could have happened if that police car hadn't been there." 6. The secluded cabin. 5 friends, Marcus, Eleanor, Thomas, Sophie, and Daniel, had planned a ski weekend in the Tatra Mountains. The group had known each other since university, except for Daniel, Sophie's recent boyfriend, who had joined the trip at the last minute when another friend cancelled. The forecast called for only light snow, Elena reported later. No one expected the storm that formed. On the afternoon of January 17th, while skiing, the weather changed drastically. Strong winds and heavy snow reduced visibility to almost zero. With the slopes closing and the cable car halted for safety, the group was advised to seek shelter at the Horski Dom hut, a remote structure used by rangers and climbers located 2 kilometers away. Following the directions, they managed to reach the rustic wooden cabin. The interior was basic: a main room with a fireplace, small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and an attic. There was no electricity other than a diesel generator and no cell phone signal. An emergency radio was the only means of communicating with the outside. "Initially, we were just grateful to find shelter," Thomas explained. "The storm seemed to get worse by the minute." Marcus, who had mountaineering experience, tried to contact emergency services by radio, reporting his location. The answer was clear. Due to the intensity of the storm, no rescue would be possible for at least 24 hours. They were to remain in the hut, conserve resources, and wait. On the first night, the group maintained high morale, treating the situation as an unexpected adventure. Daniel, in particular, seemed calm, taking responsibility for keeping the fire going and checking supplies. "He knew that type of cabin surprisingly well," Elena commented. "I knew where everything was, how to operate the generator, details that not even Marcus, with all his experience, knew." The next morning, Marcus discovered that the radio no longer worked. Upon examining it, he noticed that some internal components had been damaged, not through wear and tear, but deliberately. "Someone messed with this," he told the group. "Those wires have been cut." The accusation hung in the air. Everyone denied involvement, but a climate of distrust took hold. Sophie suggested that perhaps the radio was already damaged when they arrived, but Marcus was sure it worked perfectly the night before. As the storm continued, Thomas noticed another disturbing detail. The generator's fuel level had dropped dramatically overnight, far more than normal use would warrant. Upon investigating, he found traces of diesel in the snow outside, as if someone had deliberately wasted the fuel. "We are being sabotaged," he concluded. "Someone doesn't want us to be rescued." The group decided to establish surveillance shifts during the night. It was during her shift that Elena made an alarming discovery: a backpack hidden in the attic containing a pistol, false identity documents, and a significant amount of money in different currencies. Confronted with the evidence, Daniel initially denied knowledge, but when Thomas mentioned contacting authorities as soon as possible, Daniel's behavior changed drastically. "You wouldn't understand," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "I can't allow them to leave here and identify me." It was then that Daniel's true identity emerged. He was not the financial analyst he claimed to be, but Lucas Novak, wanted in 3 countries for sophisticated fraud. The storm had been a convenient coincidence. He had planned to disappear into the mountains, faking his death to start a new life with false documents. The group's unexpected presence at the cabin he had chosen as a transition point threatened his plans. "He admitted he sabotaged the radio and generator," Sophie reported. "He said he needed time to implement his Plan B, which apparently involved making sure none of us could identify him later." What followed was a tense standoff. Daniel and Lucas, now armed, kept the group under constant surveillance. Marcus, realizing the seriousness of the situation, tried to negotiate, while Thomas discreetly looked for a way to fix the radio. On the 3rd night, when the storm finally began to subside, Elena managed to distract Daniel long enough for Marcus to overpower him. In the ensuing struggle, a shot was fired, wounding Thomas in the shoulder. With Daniel immobilized, Sophie managed to partially repair the radio, briefly establishing contact with emergency services. The next morning, a rescue team arrived at the cabin, finding the group exhausted but alive, and Daniel tied to a chair. The subsequent investigation revealed the extent of Lucas Novak's crimes and his elaborate escape plan. The cabin had been carefully chosen and prepared weeks before, with supplies hidden and escape routes mapped out. "The most disturbing thing," concluded the chief investigator, "is that without the storm forcing others to seek shelter there, his plan probably would have worked perfectly." Lucas Novak was convicted of multiple charges, including attempted murder, and is serving time in a maximum security prison. The four surviving friends remain in close contact, united by the traumatic experience, but none of them have returned to skiing in the Tatra Mountains. 7. The Red Umbrella. Yumiko Tanaka's case was documented by Matsui police as one of the most disturbing incidents in the historic Japanese city. The events of those rainy days were reconstructed from police records, statements, and Yumiko's personal diary. Yumiko, a 34-year-old university professor, had moved to Matsue 6 months earlier to teach literature at the local university. The city, known for its cloudy weather and frequent rain, was famous for the red umbrellas that were part of a local program called Dandan Casa, where tourists and residents could collect free umbrellas made available in special boxes around the city. It was during a rainy October afternoon that Yumiko first noticed the man with the red umbrella. He was standing across the street as she walked out of the university. What caught her attention was not just the umbrella, common in the city, but the way the man seemed to watch her intently, even through the curtain of rain. "Initially, I didn't think much of it," Yumiko wrote in her diary. "Matsue is a small town. Casual encounters are common." 3 days later, during another storm, Yumiko saw the same man again, this time near her apartment, almost 2 kilometers from the university. He wore the same distinctive red umbrella, and when their eyes met, he quickly turned and disappeared down a side street. Worried, Yumiko began recording these sightings. In his diary, he noted that they occurred exclusively on rainy days, always with the man carrying the same characteristic red umbrella. After their 5th date in 2 weeks, she decided to talk to her neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Miyazaki, who had lived in Matsue for decades. "Red umbrella, you say?" Ms. Miyazaki looked troubled. "There is an old story in Matsue about an umbrella seller who was unjustly killed. It is said that his spirit returns on rainy days, carrying a red umbrella that cannot be closed." Yumiko, skeptical by nature, politely thanked him but dismissed the story as local folklore. However, her curiosity led her to research more about the city. That's when he discovered something disturbing. In the last 5 years, 3 people had disappeared in Matsue. All of the disappearances occurred on days of heavy rain, and the last person seen with each was described as a man with a red umbrella. Alarmed, Yumiko took her findings to the local police. Detective Tanaka listened carefully, but explained that there was not enough evidence to link the disappearances or confirm that the same man was involved. "Matsue hands out hundreds of red umbrellas every year," he explained. "It's impossible to track each one or identify a suspect from that description alone." Unsatisfied with the answer, Yumiko decided to investigate on her own. She began mapping the locations of the previous disappearances and noticed that they all occurred within a 2-kilometer radius of the city's main canal, near the old umbrella shop area mentioned in the legend Mrs. Miyazaki had told. During a particularly strong storm in mid-November, Yumiko saw the man again. This time, he was following a young student who was walking alone along the canal bank. Driven by the instinct to protect the girl, Yumiko followed the two discreetly. When the man and the student turned into a narrow, deserted street, Yumiko saw the man quicken his pace. Fearing the worst, she shouted a warning. The student turned around, confused, but the man with the red umbrella quickly disappeared between the alleys. Police, finally convinced there was a pattern, increased surveillance on rainy days. 2 weeks later, they arrested a man named Hiroshi Nakamura when he approached a woman during a thunderstorm. In his apartment, they found 3 identical red umbrellas and evidence linking him to the previous disappearances. The investigation revealed that Nakamura, a local history teacher, had become obsessed with the legend of the umbrella seller. He chose rainy days for his crimes, not only because of the reduced visibility, but also as a twisted tribute to local legend. He believed he was continuing a tradition. Detective Tanaka explained, the rain not only provided cover for his crimes, but also meaning. Thanks to Yumiko's persistence, the families of the previous victims finally got answers. The city of Matsue, although shaken by the events, continued its umbrella program, but now with additional safety and awareness measures. And for Yumiko, the rain in Matsue never felt the same again. Even though she knew the real culprit was trapped, she couldn't help but do a double take when she saw a red umbrella on a rainy day, a reminder of how ancient legends sometimes find disturbing new ways to persist in the modern world. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving rainy days. So, what did you think? Which story gave you the most goosebumps? Will any of them make you look differently at the next storm? Tell me in the comments which one was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the terrifying world of rainy days, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to keep bringing more scary content like this. And if you are not yet registered, take the opportunity now to sign up and activate the bell.